Dr. Ebrahim Moosa is a professor of religious and Islamic studies, and he is in the country for a series of speaking activities and workshops on interfaith issues. And he's here in Daybreak today to talk more about this. Good morning, Dr. Moosa.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
And thanks for coming in. First, let's talk about what are the common misconceptions of Islam?
I think one of the most common misconceptions about Islam is that Islam is extremely different from all other religions. And I think in a country like Philippines, where you have a large Christian community, there's a great deal of commonality between Islam and Christianity. Of course, there are different faith traditions, but they share a great deal in common. So for instance, many of the prophets that Christianity revere are also revered in Islam. Jesus has a special status in Islam, very different from what he has in Christianity. The concerns about the care for the poor, justice, all the kind of social issues are some of those great misconceptions that people think that are not available in Islam, that are only available in Christianity or Judaism are there. I think some of the other misconceptions is that a lot of the violence that takes place around the world in the name of religion, done by Muslim actors, many people think that that is religiously motivated violence, when in fact it is not religiously motivated violence. The violence stems from concerns about the political, concerns about economics, but the actors, because they have a Muslim identity, sometimes use religion to justify their violent activities. So I think the question of a lot of Muslims find that form of describing terrorists as Muslim terrorists, Muslim guerrillas, to be somewhat offensive to them.
Yes.
And so they prefer that the media call them just guerrillas or terrorists.
Yes.
Because we don't identify Hindu terrorists or Buddhist terrorists or Christian terrorists. Terrorists are terrorists because they are using whatever ideology, religious ideology they have for their own political goals.
I can relate to that because I've once worked with Turkish men who are Muslim, and they do not refer to, some news agencies would say Islamist extremists.
Yes.
And in their culture, they wouldn't prefer to be called Islam extremists or connect Islam to extremists.
They're just extremists.
Just extremists,
yes.
Exactly.
Now, there can be a separate conversation about, how do they use religion, and I'm sure we can talk about that later.
How they can use, but why is it important, since you said that there are many similarities between our religion, Christians and the Muslims, but so why is it important for interfaith dialogue between all the religions?
I think the key issue of interfaith dialogue is for people to know each other. One is to read about these various traditions in books and to have kind of intelligent conversation about it. But the key issue is to know each other. And I think when Christians and Muslims come to know each other, when they can touch each other, there's a different kind of attitude. So I advocate that not only should one have a kind of a scholarly engagement, but also there must be contact between Muslims and Christians. They should go to each other's mosques and churches. They should be visiting synagogues if they are Jewish communities, Hindu temples. There should be contact with families so that people then realize that it's not only the label, but there are real people out there. And that will break down a number of barriers and also misconceptions and suspicions. And then that then leads to trust building. And when people can trust each other, despite their differences, we must celebrate our differences, but we can also trust beyond those differences. That trust can then develop into people working together in mobilization, in social change, in doing all kinds of great things, in enhancing the society, fighting poverty and uplifting the society, economic prosperity, political stability. Religious communities can play a very big role in doing that and overcoming some of the destabilization that the religious conversation and the religious violence brings in various communities.
True. Now in the news that we've been reading some stories about women being persecuted or even children in some Muslim countries. And how do we explain that to the world? What is going on in these countries, these Muslim countries, where some of the women are being persecuted?
No, there's no excuse for these persecutions, and there's no excuse for the abuse of children for whatever purpose they are. We have horror stories of children, young children being married off in places like Yemen and parts of Saudi Arabia. There's just no excuse for that, and I think it's very important that Muslim leaders, religious leaders, political leaders speak out about this, and without any ambivalence, without any hesitation, to speak out against that. Mm-hmm. Part of the issue is that the question of women, for instance, the status of women. In places like Saudi Arabia, women cannot drive. Mm-hmm. But in neighboring Qatar, for instance, you find women are very much on an upward mobility track in the same culture. Mm-hmm. But it's a smaller society. Qatar is just a neighbor of Saudi Arabia. In Qatar, you find, the sheikha, the wife of the emir, mm-hmm. is doing very much advanced work in education. Their daughters are taking leadership in society. The deans of the Sharia college in Qatar, for instance, there was a woman, Aisha Manai. So you can see it in two different countries, mm-hmm. two very different kind of attitudes. What that means is that the question of the status of women is an ongoing in-house conversation amongst Muslims. Okay. There are very strong debates out there, mm-hmm. and we need to encourage those conversations, so those who are not part of the conversation yet, how they can become part of that conversation. Also the question of rights and human mm-hmm. rights and the rights of children. Mm-hmm. That must be stated very unambivalently and without any kind of hesitation, so that Muslims can learn, and especially religious leaders. Religious leaders play a very important role. Some of them are still trapped in an old mindset. Right. They're not very much up to speed with the kind of current developments in societies, and they want to keep on drawing society back to a particular time when it's not going to be possible. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a great literacy deficit, mm-hmm. even in the religious leadership, and therefore you see all kinds of very unhappy fatwas and very detrimental to Islam's image happening, and largely because Muslims are not doing enough about the change themselves.
Okay, so you think that in the future, women's rights and women's inequality, there will be progress and things will change?
Yeah, you look at a neighboring country like Malaysia, Sisters mm-hmm. in Islam is doing phenomenal work. Mm-hmm. You see in Indonesia, there's great upward mobility for women there too. Mm-hmm. But in other parts of the world, that is still lagging, and there's a deficit there.
Okay, another issue that's going on right now that people have read in the news is like Muslim society's conversion to other religion. Mm-hmm. And there's some talk about that some people are against that in their country. So what's your take on that?
It's about the old legacies and new global developments. So for instance, the idea that if someone changes their religion, we call it apostasy. Mm-hmm. Historically, apostasy meant that when you change your religion, you also change your citizenship, what we would call today. Oh. In other words, you show disloyalty to the government. Okay. At a time when your faith and your political identity was the same thing, mm-hmm. so apostasy would be seen as an act of sedition, okay. as an act of treason, that you're disloyal to the country. That has now changed. We no longer have an imperial order. Okay. We now have citizenship that is disconnected to religion. Okay. So your citizenship is protected, but your religious choice is your individual choice. Mm-hmm. So you can be Christian, Muslim, and there is in Islamic theology no basis mm-hmm. to persecute somebody for the changes of their faith, because in Islam it's very categorical that there is no compulsion in matters of religion. Mm-hmm. And it's only when religion is used as part of a treasonous force in order to undermine the stability of society that people can take serious action about that. But in the modern world, where we have nation states, that doesn't even apply. But unfortunately, in some countries like Pakistan, in countries like Egypt, and places where people convert their religion from Islam to another religion, the governments or members of civil society criticize those people, or there are some very harsh penalties by which people are threatened. That is totally unacceptable.
Mm-hmm. So just like you said, it's an old mindset, and there is a new way of doing things now, because citizenship is apart from religion. Yeah. So if you are Muslim and you want to convert, it's okay.
It should be perfectly okay.
It's okay.
Because citizenship is the new way going forward. Right. But again, this question of citizenship and how citizenship manifests itself is a work in progress. Okay. So for instance, you take a society such as Egypt, for instance. Mm-hmm. The question of citizenship in some of their political developments is still very much not clear. You see sometimes Islamic arguments being forwarded and people ignoring the citizenship requirements of Egyptian people. But in the neighboring Tunisia, you would find that citizenship is very well adapted there. Mm-hmm. In the United States, for instance, Muslims are clearly, understanding what their role as citizens are, and what their roles are as members of a faith community, and it works very well out there.
Right,
But it's
so
a work in progress in many places.
exactly, exactly. So it depends on each country.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much for coming in. I wish we had more time to chat, and good luck with all the activities that are coming up, and welcome to the Philippines.
Thank you so much. You have a great country.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you. And that was Dr. Ebrahim Moosa, a professor of religious and Islamic studies.